What would you do if your wife lied about visiting her widowed mother every weekend? I never imagined I'd be here, sharing the most painful chapter of my life with strangers on the internet. But I need to tell this story because I'm still trying to process what happened, and maybe some of you have been through something similar. Maybe you can help me understand how someone can use grief, real, devastating grief, as a cover. For betrayal. My name is Mark, and I've been married to Jessica for 8 years. We met in college, dated for 3 years, and I thought we had built something solid together. Jessica was always close to her parents, especially her father. He was this larger-than-life guy, a retired firefighter who coached Little League baseball and could fix anything with his bare hands. Jessica adored him, and he treated me like the son he never had when her father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last year. It devastated our entire family. Jessica became his primary caregiver, driving to her parents' house almost daily to help with appointments, medications, and just to spend time with him. I supported her completely. How could I not? This was her father dying, and she was being an incredible daughter. The cancer moved fast. Within 6 months, he was gone. I'll never forget the phone call Jessica received that Tuesday morning in March. She collapsed in our kitchen, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. I held her as she grieved, and I grieved too. This man had welcomed me into his family, taught me how to change brake pads, and always asked about my work with genuine interest. His death left a hole in all of our lives. Jessica's mother, Carol, took the loss especially hard. They'd been married for 32 years, and suddenly she was alone in that big house they'd shared. In the weeks following the funeral, Jessica became increasingly worried about her mom's mental state. She barely eats, Jessica would tell me, tears in her eyes. She just sits in his chair and stares at the TV. I don't think she's sleeping either. I can't leave her alone like this, Mark, so we agreed that Jessica would start spending weekends at her mother's house. Every Saturday morning, she'd pack a small bag and drive the 45 minutes to her childhood home. She'd come back Sunday evening, exhausted but feeling like she was doing something important to help her mom heal. How's Carol doing? I'd ask each week. A little better, Jessica would say. We went through some of Dad's things this weekend. It's hard, but I think it's helping her process everything. She actually made dinner for us on Sunday, which is the first time she's cooked since the funeral. I was proud of my wife. She was sacrificing her weekends, dealing with her own grief, and helping her mother navigate the worst period of her life. When friends asked why Jessica wasn't at weekend gatherings anymore, I'd explain the situation, and everyone understood. She's being such a good daughter, they'd say, and I'd nod with pride. This routine continued for months. Every Friday evening, Jessica would pack her weekend bag. Every Saturday morning, she'd kiss me goodbye and drive to Mom's house. Every Sunday evening, she'd return home, usually quiet and emotionally drained, which made perfect sense given what she was dealing with. I never questioned it. Why would I? My wife was helping her grieving mother. It was noble, selfless, and exactly what I'd expect from the woman I married, but then came the weekend that changed everything. It was a Saturday in early October, about 7 months after her father's death. Jessica had left that morning as usual, telling me she'd be back Sunday evening. Around noon, I got a call from my buddy Jake asking if I wanted to meet up for a beer and watch the game. I wasn't doing anything special, so I agreed. We met at Murphy's, this sports bar downtown that we'd been going to for years. We grabbed a table, ordered our drinks, and settled in to watch football. About an hour into the game, Jake's expression suddenly changed. He was looking past me toward the bar area, and his face went pale. "Mark," he said quietly, "don't turn around right away, but..." "Isn't that Jessica?" My heart stopped. Jessica was supposed to be at her mother's house, 45 minutes away, helping sort through grief and memories. There was no way she could be here at Murphy's in the middle of a Saturday afternoon, but when I finally turned around, there she was. Jessica was sitting at a corner table, and she wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man I'd never seen before, tall, dark hair, probably in his 30s. They were leaning toward each other, talking intently, and Jessica was laughing. Actually laughing, not the polite chuckle you give when someone tries to cheer you up during a difficult time, but genuine, bright laughter. As I watched, the man reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand palm up and interlaced their fingers. I felt like I was going to throw up. Jake was saying something, but I couldn't hear him over the rushing sound in my ears. My wife, who was supposed to be comforting her widowed mother, was holding hands with a stranger in a bar. The woman who came home exhausted every Sunday evening from dealing with mom's grief was sitting there looking happier and more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. I don't remember deciding to leave. I just found myself standing up, throwing money on the table, and walking out of that bar like a zombie. Jake followed me, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't form words. I got in my car and drove home in a daze. That night was the longest of my life. I sat in our living room, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe this guy was a grief counselor or a family friend helping Jessica deal with her father's death. Maybe they'd met at her mother's house and decided to grab coffee to talk about Carol's progress, but even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew I was lying to myself. The way they looked at each other, the hand holding, Jessica's genuine happiness, none of that spoke to a therapeutic or innocent relationship. When Jessica came home Sunday evening, she played her part perfectly. She looked tired, a little sad, and gave me the usual update about her mom. "How was your weekend?" she asked, kissing my cheek. "Fine, I managed." "How's Carol?" "Still struggling, but we had some good moments." We went through more of Dad's photo albums, and she told me stories about their early dating years. It was actually really sweet. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her who the man was, why she was lying to me, how long this had been going on. But I couldn't find the words. Instead, I nodded and pretended everything was normal. The next week was torture. I went through the motions of our regular routine, but inside I was falling apart. Every time Jessica mentioned her mother, every time she packed that weekend bag, I felt sick. I started paying attention to details I'd never noticed before. When she came home from these visits, she never smelled like Carol's house, that mixture of vanilla candles and old books that I remembered from previous visits. Her clothes were never wrinkled from sleeping on Carol's uncomfortable guest bed. And now that I thought about it, she never brought home any of the leftovers that Carol used to send with her. I considered confronting her directly, but I needed more information. What if I was wrong? What if there was an explanation? So I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. The next Saturday morning, Jessica went through her usual routine. She packed her bag, kissed me goodbye, and told me she'd call later to check in. I waited 20 minutes after she left, then got in my car and drove toward Carol's house, but Jessica's car wasn't in Carol's driveway. It wasn't anywhere on the street. I sat there for a few minutes, processing this confirmation of my worst fears. Then I drove to Carol's front door and knocked. Carol answered, and she looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Mark, what are you doing here? Is everything okay? I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing. Is Jessica here?" Carol looked confused. "Jessica? No, honey, she's not here. I haven't seen her since ... Oh, it must be 3 weeks ago now. Is she supposed to be here?" The bottom fell out of my world. 3 weeks. Jessica had been lying to me for at least 3 weeks, probably longer. Carol had no idea that her daughter was supposedly spending every weekend taking care of her. I made some excuse about getting my dates mixed up and left Carol's house in a state of complete shock. My wife had been lying to me for months, using her father's death and her mother's grief as cover for what? An affair. A double life. I didn't even know what to call it. I spent the rest of that Saturday driving around aimlessly, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to drive straight to Murphy's to see if she was there again. Part of me wanted to go home and pack her bags, but mostly I just felt numb. When Jessica came home that evening, she launched into her usual post-visit report. She told me about the dinner she and Carol had shared a lie, the old movies they'd watched together a lie, and how Carol was slowly starting to sort through her husband's belongings another lie. I listened to every word, watching my wife's face as she constructed this elaborate fiction. She was good at it, convincing, detailed, emotionally appropriate. How long had she been lying to me? How long had she been living this double life? "You seem quiet tonight," she said, settling next to me on the couch. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about work stuff," I replied, because I still wasn't ready for the confrontation that would end everything, but I knew I couldn't go on like this. The next day, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrible. I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds. I know it makes me seem paranoid or controlling. But I needed to know the truth, and Jessica had proven she couldn't be trusted to tell it to me. I needed evidence, not just suspicions. The investigator, a woman named Patricia, was professional and discreet. I gave her Jessica's schedule and asked her to document where my wife actually went during her supposed visits to her mother. It took Patricia exactly 1 weekend to give me the answers I dreaded. Jessica wasn't visiting her mother. She wasn't at Murphy's either. Instead, she was spending her weekends at a cabin about an hour north of the city. The cabin belonged to the man I'd seen her with at the bar. His name was Ryan, and he was a divorced father of 2 who worked in marketing. Patricia's report included photos, timestamps, and details that painted a clear picture. Jessica would arrive at the cabin Saturday morning and leave Sunday afternoon. Sometimes they'd go out for meals or drinks in the small town nearby. Sometimes they'd spend the entire weekend inside, but they were definitely together, and they were definitely not grieving. The report also revealed that Ryan's ex-wife had the kids every other weekend, which aligned perfectly with Jessica's supposed visits to her mother. They had planned this carefully, coordinating their affair around custody schedules and family obligations. When I read Patricia's report, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, but my ability to trust, to believe in the person I'd shared my life with for 8 years. Jessica hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd used her father's death, her mother's grief, and my compassion as tools to facilitate her betrayal. I confronted her the next Friday evening before she could pack for another fake visit to Carol. "Jessica," I said, sitting across from her at our kitchen table, "we need to talk." Something in my voice must have warned her, because her face immediately went guarded. "What's wrong?" I placed Patricia's report on the table between us. "I know about Ryan. I know about the cabin. I know you haven't been visiting your mother." For a moment, Jessica just stared at the papers. Then she looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Not remorse, not shame, but calculation. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, how much she could still deny. "Mark, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you used your father's death to cover up an affair. How you let me comfort you about your grief while you were planning weekends with another man. How you made me worrying about your mother's well-being while she was sitting alone, wondering why her daughter had disappeared from her life." Jessica's composure finally cracked. She started crying, but even her tears felt manipulative now. "It's not what you think. Ryan and I were just friends. He's helping me through a difficult time. Friends don't spend weekends alone at cabins, Jessica. Friends don't hold hands in bars. And friends don't lie to their husbands for months about where they're going." The conversation that followed was painful and surreal. Jessica cycled through every cliché excuse. She was confused. She never meant for it to happen. She loved me, but wasn't in love with me anymore. She needed space to figure out what she wanted. She even tried to blame me, saying I hadn't been supportive enough during her grief, that I didn't understand what she was going through. But the thing that hurt most was her complete lack of acknowledgement about how she'd weaponized her father's death. When I brought it up, she actually seemed annoyed that I was making it about that. My father's death has nothing to do with Ryan, she said. That's separate. It's not separate, Jessica. You used Dad's death as your cover story. You made me feel guilty for even questioning why you were gone every weekend. You used my love and respect for your father to hide your affair. Even then, she didn't seem to understand why that made it worse. We're in the middle of divorce proceedings now. Jessica moved out 2 months ago, and I assume she's living with Ryan, though she won't admit it. She's told people that we're separating because of irreconcilable differences and the stress of her father's death. She's managed to maintain her narrative even in our breakup. The hardest part has been dealing with Carol. When the truth came out, she was devastated, not just about the affair, but about learning that Jessica had been using her as an alibi. Carol felt responsible, wondering if she'd failed as a mother, if she'd somehow driven Jessica to this behavior. I've tried to maintain a relationship with Carol because I genuinely care about her and because she's innocent in all of this, but it's complicated. Every time I see her, I'm reminded of the elaborate lies my wife told, and I know Carol struggles with the same feelings. The thing that haunts me most is how easily Jessica lied. The detail, the consistency, the emotional manipulation, it all came so naturally to her that I have to wonder if this was the first time or just the first time I caught her. I keep thinking about all those Sunday evenings when she'd come home exhausted from caring for her grieving mother. Now I know she was tired from spending the weekend with her lover, and I was the fool offering comfort and understanding for her supposed sacrifice. Jessica destroyed our marriage, but she also tainted some of my most sacred memories, the support I gave her during her father's illness, the pride I felt in her devotion to her mother, the respect I had for her character. All of it is poisoned now by the knowledge of how she used those emotions against me. People ask me if I saw any signs, if I suspected anything. The truth is, there were small things that didn't quite add up, but I explained them away because I trusted my wife. I believed her when she said she was helping her mother heal. I believed her when she came home sad and tired. I believed her because I loved her and because using a parent's death as cover for an affair was so far outside my moral universe that it never occurred to me as a possibility. Now I'm trying to rebuild my life and my ability to trust. Some days are better than others. I've started therapy. I've reconnected with friends I'd neglected, and I'm slowly learning to be alone without feeling lonely, but I still struggle with the fundamental question: how does someone you love, someone you've shared your life with, look you in the eye week after week and lie with such conviction? How does someone use the most painful loss in their family's history as a tool for deception? I'm sharing this story because I know there are others out there who've been betrayed, who've had their trust shattered by someone they loved. Maybe you're watching this and recognizing signs in your own relationship. Maybe you're struggling with whether to confront a partner about suspicious behavior. My advice is this: trust your instincts, but verify what you can. Don't let love make you blind to obvious inconsistencies. And if someone is using tragedy, illness, or family crisis as their explanation for unusual behavior, pay attention to the details. Sometimes the most sacred things in our lives, death, grief, family loyalty, are exactly what manipulative people will exploit. I learned that my wife was capable of betrayal so profound that it still takes my breath away, but I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought, and that a life built on lies isn't worth preserving, no matter how much it hurts to let it go. If you're going through something similar, know that you're not alone. The pain is real, the betrayal cuts deep, and the road back to trusting others is long. But it's possible to survive this, and it's possible to build something better from the wreckage. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, especially if you've been through something similar. How do you rebuild trust after a betrayal like this? How do you move forward when someone has used your deepest values against you? Because I'm still figuring that out, one day at a time.